It's blinking red.
Ooh.
Daniel Sheffy made a very, very bad joke about the red camera.
Oh, I thought he made the camera ashamed.
Something like that.
Something like that.
So, are you good?
Yeah, good to go.
Good to go? Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Exhausted?
Exhausted? No.
No. You look good.
Just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I couldn't really listen to your keynote. I was sitting here. I was looking there, and you were standing on the stage, and I could read everything what's on the board. But I was sitting here recording a podcast. But you had a very, very, very nice topic, and I think we should cover it in this episode. So, training with intent.
Mm-hmm.
What does it really mean?
Mm-hmm.
What's your perspective on training in general? But maybe start with a little introduction for the people who don't know who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Jami Tikkanen. I'm originally from Finland. It's been over 20 years now that I lived abroad.
Where?
So it all began in France, in Paris.
Can you speak French?
Oui, je parle français.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so we can do this interview in French, Finnish or English.
Yeah, but it's going to be very boring because I can't answer your questions.
Perfect. So. Oui. Okay, yeah, so I moved to France first. I was there for a little over 4 years. I worked at Disney. I studied Chinese medicine, thought I'm going to become a martial arts instructor. And then I found CrossFit, which derailed me completely. I graduated from Chinese medicine, moved to UK, London, studied osteopathy and opened a CrossFit gym. And in 2010, I competed there were sanctionals at the time. Witnessed Mikko competing in the same competition as the other participants, but no one else was competing against him. And from there on, essentially 2011, I went to help him in Halmstad in Sweden at the semifinals or the regionals at the time. He didn't even have to compete because he was the champion. But I'm getting my years wrong. It was 2009 that I competed, and this is 2010. But I met Annie there that I've seen before competing at the games, and I just knew that she had a lot of talent, but she needed some coaching, and I was foolish enough to offer to coach her.
So you just went there and said, "Hey, Annie, I like you. You want to be coached?"
Yeah, I said, "Hey, you're very good, but you don't know anything yet. I think I can help you." Something like that, you know. I was in my 20s, so I thought I knew everything. No, I didn't, but I felt confident that I could help her, and I offered my help, and she took it. And that's kind of like fast forward from there to now. That's kind of the path that I'm still on.
I mean, it sounds very exciting, and you like speed it through like 13 years.
Absolutely. Just ignore those years.
Yeah.
Now.
So a lot has happened, especially with the athletes which you coach. They were very successful. And I think that is mainly the reason because they trained the way you wanted them to train. And it says the training plan here on your shirt. Maybe it has something to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, initially for me, the training plan started with the idea that there are a lot of people working out and not as many people training, with an intent to actually get better on something over time, or they don't have a specific goal, or they have a goal, but they're not really training for it. They just show up at the gym, work out, and hope for the best. So the idea came from this rowing training program that was called I want to say it was called the Wolverine Plan. And
I was crazy.
Yeah, and I was reading about this, and it was some university rowing program. And they were just making the distinction between working out and training with an intent and having a plan, and saying that, hey, if you have a goal, you have to figure out what the work is that you have to do to accomplish that goal. And then that work is not negotiable. You can still decide that you're not willing to do the work, but if you are willing to do the work, then that's the work that you have to do. You can't get to that goal if you don't put in the effort. And that was kind of the inspiring thought for me to name the program, the training plan.
And it's so simple, right?
Yeah, it's there.
It's perfectly describing the thing it is.
Yes, it's almost too simple.
Simple is good,
yeah,
in my opinion.
It is.
So when you think about that approach, it makes total sense, right? So not only for the training, but for everything in life.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a goal, you know how to work towards the goal. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to have the awareness Just now we had Michel Etendre talk about self-awareness, but you have to have the awareness to know who you are or who the athlete is that you're working with. So you have to understand what the starting point is to reach that goal. Because if you're on step 9 and you want to go to step 10, that's a different journey than if you're on step 1. So you have to understand who the athlete is first, or who you are first if you want to accomplish something, so you know what the path must look like.
So you're working with like elite athletes and with the general population. Would you like, is there a big difference on how the approach is, or is it the same just on another level?
It is and it isn't. I mean, in a sense, I started the training plan with the idea that I felt like we were doing, back in 2010, 11, 12, we were doing something different to what was done in the sport. We had a team, different specialists. We tried to professionalize the training to a higher level. And my idea initially was to bring that kind of experience to a normal person, you know, to have a sense of having this team behind them. Nowadays, I would think about it a little bit differently. I would say that the lessons that we've learned from training high elite athletes to a degree translate to normal people. It's just the level of accuracy and precision in the application is at a completely different level when you're training to be the best in the world than if you're just training to be the best version of yourself.
But what would you say, what is similar from training an elite athlete to like a general population, or me, for example, like a regular gym goer who's like into CrossFit for several years, but I don't have any aspirations on competing, or sometimes I do the open, sometimes I'm injured, but I just want to be fit, look good. So how do you approach training with someone like that?
Yeah, I think for everyone, it's good to think that you have some kind of a limited amount of time, energy, and focus to train. So you have some kind of a budget that you have to spend, essentially. So you have to make good decisions about how you're going to spend it. In a sense, if the volume of training is fixed, that you can do either because you're a high-level athlete and there's just physically it's impossible for you to train more without falling apart, or if you're a normal person and you have a busy life and you know you can train 3, 4, 5 hours a week, you have to get more out of those hours. And the way to get more out of those hours is to really focus on the quality of the time, the quality of the execution once you go and train. And I think that is what I spoke about today, and that is a topic that's very close to my heart, is the quality of the training. Because ultimately the quality of your training will determine the results you will get from the training, but also it's going to determine how you feel about your training and yourself when you're doing it.
How do you define the quality?
I think quality really comes to the intent of training. So if you have an intent of something you'd like to accomplish, you have to ask yourself, are you applying the right intensity, the right technique, and the right focus to actually execute the training that you're doing to match the intent of that training session? And when those two things align, that is what I would call quality training.
Can you make an example for an intent?
Yeah, so let's say you're trying to get stronger. So you go to a gym and you do a movement. Let's say it's a specific one. So you're going to do a back squat and you want to get stronger. And you make a choice of doing 3 sets of 30 reps with the hope of getting stronger. It's very unlikely that you have to get stronger. You might build your endurance during that stuff. But the weight is not going to be significant enough to create the stimulus that's needed in your nervous system, in your muscles to get stronger. So you have to do something else. So then you need to rely on your understanding of training principles and physiology and say, well, maybe that range that I want to work on is maybe 3 to 6 reps for a period of time. And then if I really want to peak my strength, I might need to work on 1 to 3 reps with the understanding that with those reps comes a specific loading. If we say that training needs to be hard for it to be progressive to a degree, and if I'm doing 3 reps versus 30, then the barbell is going to be heavier. So I know that I need heavy loads to get stronger. I need to do enough volume to be able to get the stimulus, but I also need to be able to recover, so I cannot do too much. And it's kind of essentially becomes this game where these variables start from very broad, where everything is possible to, I have a specific goal. So more and more through my understanding of the training, I know that I have to do specific things to get that stimulus, right? So I don't know if that was clear enough. Yeah.
I mean, it answered the question somehow. So you just said that if I have limited amount of time in my week and I want to work out, I think the goals are very, very important, right?
Yeah.
That I know what I want to achieve. Because when you, for example, say, okay, my goal is strength, then I should focus my training on strength, lower reps, higher weights. But when I want to look good in the mirror, maybe it's a completely different goal, right?
Yeah, right. So to a degree, a bigger muscle is probably going to be a stronger muscle, all other things being equal. But if you want to, for example, train to increase your lean body mass, you're thinking about maybe training at different rep ranges. But now for strength training, if you train too close to failure, for example, it's very taxing. But for hypertrophy training, we know from research that training closer to failure will actually give you a bigger impulse to build more muscle mass. So yes, again, according to your goals, even if you're doing the same movement, the back squat, for example, you might change the rep schemes and you might change the RPE or the effort that you have to put into each single set so that you're creating the stimulus, again, that's needed for that adaptation. Yeah, so it's very important to be clear of your goals. It's also very important at that point to either understand the training process or to seek help from people that do have an understanding so you can make sure that you're making the most out of your time.
What are your thoughts on variance? I mean, it's one of the big things in CrossFit that you constantly vary your workouts. But on the other side, if you want to make a significant increase in strength, for example, you need some kind of progression, right? And usually it's like this two worlds which collide in the middle. So how do you balance both?
Yeah, and I think it depends on who that is for, but absolutely, that is a challenge. I think if you want to get better at something, let's say now change it from the squatting, and let's say you want to get better at running, you need to be running at some point. You need to do more running if you want to get better at running. The best runners in the world are running 120 to 180 kilometers a week, at least. So you're probably not doing even a fraction of that. And of course, that's something that you have to build towards to have the capacity, but you also have to be realistic. If your time budget is 3 hours a week and you want to get better at running, then you might have to run 3 times a week and spend that whole budget in running. But most people who do CrossFit, for example, they have multiple goals and they want to have that variance. There's a fun element that's really important as well. So if you're not enjoying your training, you're unlikely to do it. So you have to be sure that you actually want, first of all, you want what you say you want. If you say you want to be a better runner, then you're willing to invest in it. But if you want to have fun in training, that's not the same goal, right? Now, let's say that you have a little bigger budget. You train 5 times a week. I think it's still important to have some kind of a clear progression within those 5 sessions that you do if they're 1-hour sessions. But that still can leave room for variance, right? So you can have a combination of, let's say, linear progression or specific movements that repeat at predictable intervals from week to week, like a squatting or benching or deadlifting, or the running session that progresses from week to week. And the rest of the training can be more varied. That's still possible. And I think realistically, that's the model that most CrossFit gyms, for example, will have to apply to marry these two concepts together.
So before I started CrossFit, I used to train like bodybuild type of training. I mean, that's what usually teenagers do, right? And a lot of my friends who I worked out with like 15 years ago, they are still my friends, but I do CrossFit now and they don't. Some of them, they skip training, and some of them, they're still doing this bodybuilding kind of training. And when we stand side by side and we look in the mirror, I mean, I feel like I've chosen the right path when I look at my body, but still they say, yeah, CrossFit is losing gains, and they make fun of the training, right? Is this something that you've heard before, CrossFit is losing gains?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be a competitive bodybuilder, you better do bodybuilding, or, you know, like if that's the most important thing for you. I mean, I don't know. If you look at athletes competing in CrossFit, I don't think that they lost any gains. Right? I don't think they lost any gains. Obviously, the progress is not as fast if they only did strength and hypertrophy training. But that never was the goal, right? Probably one of the reasons why you are still training and they're not is because you enjoy your training way more. You didn't get bored. There was always something new to learn. And there was a community as well that supported you, or that was exciting to be part of. So I think if the best way to lose your gains is to do nothing, right? So if you stop training altogether, you can lose infinitely more gains than you will lose by doing CrossFit. So yeah, I can imagine this situation. I haven't heard it. Maybe just because the people I hang out with look big enough that no one dares to say that.
So one of the quotes from Greg Glassman is the training varies by degree, not kind, right? When he said, okay, your grandma can do the Olympic lifting with the PVC pipe and you can do the lifting with the barbell. It's kind of similar, like the CrossFit Games athlete approach in comparison to like a regular gym goer, right?
I'm going to say yes and no. It's kind of like if you enjoy basketball, there's some things if you go and play with your buddies outside that you'll do, and there's some things you never do. There's a lot of drills and exercises and things and plays, complex strategies and tactics that you'll never have to even think about. But if you then think that you can go and play in the NBA, you realize that it's a different sport, right? So this is a little bit the same thing with CrossFit Games. I talked today about technique, for example. Technique is a tool that the athletes apply to solve movement problems, and the higher the level of the competition, the more complex the problems are. So the more diverse, the more adaptable tool set the athlete will need to have. Now, if you're just a recreational athlete, you don't need 50 million different ways of doing barbell cycling. But if you're a competitive athlete in CrossFit at the games level, there's a lot of different things that you have to practice that a normal person never has to. So in some ways, yes, on a very basic level, it's okay for your grandma to do a snatch, variation maybe with the very light load. But I think it's a very far away from what the CrossFit athletes have to do. So we could argue it both ways. We can say, yes, they do vary by degree, not by kind. But I could also say, yeah, actually, it's kind of different as well.
I mean, when I look at the CrossFit Games and I see the Masters athletes, like they're 60 plus years old and they're still like doing things that I probably cannot do. It's amazing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is incredible to see what the human body is capable of when it's again comes down to a little bit the expectations that you set for yourself. And CrossFit Games throughout the years, one of the things I think that they have done really well is that they've reset the expectations for the whole community through the whole open season, the quarterfinals now, the semifinals, the games. It kind of sets the new standard each year that the athletes will then strive for. And I think every generation of the Masters athletes as well is doing the same for the next one. So yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible what we see. But it's still very different. The people who started on the individual level and who are now entering the individual competition at high level, what's required of them is still far away. It's just because the sport is growing, right? Like, I don't know, if you look at American football from the 1940s and now it's a different sport. So there is a requirement that the sport is constantly elevated, so it's moving forward. But that being said, I mean, yeah, the Masters athletes, it's incredible to watch at the games as well.
And the teens also.
Yes, yeah, the teens, they really represent the future for the sport, right? So it is very interesting to see, and there's so many new training methods, and we understand training for this sport so much better, even though we don't know that much yet, but we understand it so much better that each generation, I think ultimately, is going to be better than the previous one. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating to watch. You know, we have an athlete at the gym in CrossFit Reykjavik who just was competing in Wadapalooza in the women's division. She's a teenage athlete and she did the snatch complex with 80 kilos and placed in the top 10, you know, so it's just like incredible to see what they're capable of.
So I interviewed Michelle yesterday and I asked her the same question. What is the most rewarding thing for you as a coach?
I think it's when we solve a puzzle with the athlete. You know, like I see these like how to train for something, how to improve something, how to do better. It's a puzzle that we're trying to solve. It's a problem we're trying to solve together. And then we search for solutions and we measure the results. And when we find a solution finally to a problem that's been bothering us for a long time, or we solve a difficult puzzle, I think that's really what's the most exciting moment for me when I coach.
When you work together with a games athlete, what is the hardest thing in this like relationship between a coach and an athlete?
I think the most important thing is the trust that you build. And the hard thing is that trust takes a long time to build and it's constantly being measured. And I think as a coach, you have to really enjoy being, you really want to enjoy being in the supportive role and enjoy the role that you're doing. Sometimes, I think not so much anymore, but I think sometimes early in our sport we saw coaches who wanted to be athletes, and that wasn't maybe a good equation. So I think it's important to know your place as a coach and what you're there to do and really love that. And I think I don't feel like it's necessarily hard to do as such, but I think that trust that comes from that relationship between the coach and the athlete, that's the most important thing. that we have to do. And then the hardest thing to do with the games athletes is that they have the capacity to train so much, and there's so many things to take into account that the puzzle that you have to solve together becomes very, very complex, you know, because there's so many different things that they have to be ready for, and you don't even know half of them. And you have limited budget with your training of what you can do, so you have to make really good decisions.
Is there only a certain amount of athletes you can work with, or it's like one athlete is enough, or two is enough, or how many puzzles at the same time can you do?
That is a great question. I think one is enough. Now, I'm working currently with 9 athletes. You know, and obviously the relationship with some of them is that we've been working together for 14 years, and with some of them it's 10 years, and with some of them it's a few months. So obviously those relationships will take time to build, and the commitment levels obviously grow over the time as you get to know the athletes and get to know their commitment, etc. But you know, I'd say that, you know, 9 is a lot. 9 is just a lot. One person, and really investing in one person is already a lot.
Do you think that in order to be a great coach, you have to be a great athlete? Not at the same time, maybe, but I think you have to have a basic understanding of the sport. I mean, I think when you compare it to soccer, for example, all of the really, really great soccer coaches, they played soccer on a certain level. Is it the same in CrossFit?
I think it's helpful if you understand what the people are going through, at least at some level. I used to compete before until I started coaching Annie and realized that I'm not that good at CrossFit, you know. I think it's helpful. I don't know that it's necessary. I mean, I hope that you've tried the movements. I hope that you've tried to train. I don't think you have to be a games athlete to be a good coach. I don't think you had to qualify for the semifinals to be a good coach. But I think it's very helpful to keep in mind what the athlete is going through by having a training process for yourself. I take classes. I do my own lifting. I do my own conditioning as well. But I think it's, in a sense, it is essential to be part of the community. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if a very smart coach from a different sport could come in, take some time to understand the sport, and do something very special. I don't want to rule that out either.
In what areas do you need a coach?
Okay, so we start on A. I mean, a lot of things. I think a lot of things. For me, I would say that in training, I'm not the most coachable of athletes, ironically. Maybe that's something that most coaches are, or maybe it isn't. I'm not the most coachable of athletes, especially in the middle of intensity. But I think when it comes to outside of sports, especially, there are a lot of areas of business, marketing. There's other aspects to owning a business that I'm not an expert on. And I definitely know that I could use coaching in those areas. So I think whoever you are, there is going to be something. I think you're deluding yourself completely if you think that there's nothing that you need coaching on. If you as a coach don't need coaches, then why are you being a coach, right? Like it's a little bit almost like a contradiction to what you do for a living.
So you have a lot of coaching experience and you trained or are still training a lot of games athletes. Is there any moment that pops up in your head that was like the most amazing moment, probably at the CrossFit Games or in your relationship as a coach with an athlete?
Yeah, I think, the obvious answer is when Annie won the games first time and second time. Whenever there's been a podium finish at the games, there are obviously always high moments. But I think for me, one of the moments was a few years back when Annie came back from after pregnancy and childbirth. We had an event where there's running and heavy cleans. And before the games, I don't think that she would remember it this way, but I remember us having a training session where we talked about external and internal focus in difficult times. And we talked about the difference, let's say, running, of focusing on your little toe when you're running to dissociate yourself from the moment, or having an external focus to take everything in around you and using that as a tool, as a mental tool, a mindset tool. And then we talked about it. I kind of felt like I planted the seed a few months before the games. And then at the games, there was a barbell that she wasn't sure if she can lift that or not. And she ran into the stadium. And we had talked about like using the audience, taking it all in, using the energy from the audience in that moment. And she just kind of rose her hands up and just kind of got everyone to cheer for her. And I knew at that point that she's going to make the lift. And for me, that was like one of those like, yes, coaching moments where I was like, I planned it, that's it.
Gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, it was a very cool moment for me. I don't know if she would remember that way, but I'm going to think that I subconsciously have put that in there.
Yeah, maybe you can have her listen to this episode and then she remembers.
Yes.
So many great memories, so many great experiences, I think. And it's cool that you have a lot of exposure to this kind of athletes, because I think as a coach, you have a lot of self-development yourself when you work with a lot of people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would not be half the coach I am if it wasn't for the people that I've had the privilege to work with. I mean, the amount of challenges, it's the problems that they've brought on the table with the, choosing to try to win the CrossFit Games for so many years. Them growing as athletes, their bodies growing, etc., Annie becoming a mother, like all these things that challenged me as a coach to be better, to learn more, to always try to find solutions, and to continue to build that trust that I'm really invested into what they're doing. I mean, I wouldn't be even half the coach, absolutely, without the people that I've had the privilege to both work with and to coach.
So in this year's CrossFit Games season, a lot of changes will happen, a new venue. What are your thoughts on that?
On the new venue? Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. It'll be warm in Texas. I mean, Iceland is not that warm. I'd say wait and see. When Boss started doing the programming versus Dave Castro, there was a change in what the sport looked like, a little bit more in the power direction. Bigger athletes did better. That was at least the feeling. Because there was a change in programming. And now, of course, there was a change in programming from Carson to Madison as well. So now we have more Boss programming with Dave's, insights into that as well. And then we have a new venue on top of that. So I think that there is a chance that, again, we'll see a new expression of CrossFit, which is obviously both exciting and it's a problem, a challenge for us coaches to try to figure out what that is ahead of time. I think it's going to be very interesting. It's nice that there is this change. I mean, this is what keeps the sport growing, and this is what keeps the coaches and the athletes challenged, that it's the unknown and the unknowable, right?
Any predictions for the games?
Björkvin is going to, or Jonna are going to win the games. No, I mean, what are the predictions for the games? I'm not big into prediction game, to be honest. Like, people ask me about the Open or semifinals or quarterfinals, the games. I'm not big into predicting, but of course, I'm thinking always of a pool of things that might show up. And if I have very good predictions, I should obviously keep them to myself so that the other coaches and athletes don't know about them. Keep the edge.
I got that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, as a spectator, it's probably as exciting as a coach, because, I mean, obviously I'm not as invested as you, but I still really enjoy watching it. And I can feel all the emotions through the TV. And it's going to be a very interesting season.
Yeah, and I think with new changes, it always gets more interesting for the spectators to watch it. So yeah, I'm excited for people watching the sport this year with the growth and with all the new athletes coming in and the level of the athletes. I mean, I think it's going to be incredible.
Jami, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure, and I hope we talk soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here.